is done. So what is next? Well, we were going to look at how we are going to implement the loaded status and the dirty status, which basically comes down to calling get buffer by file name, which we were getting ready to actually do. Alright, so what we need is get buffer by file name, buffer. Here's the app pointers. Where's the name? File name and file name length. Put those right there. Access all. There we go. That was easy. So what we're going to do now is say, actually let's move this down to here. If buffer exists, right, I believe that's the correct, quick to the buffer summary, yeah, exists. So if the buffer exists, then what? Well, then we're going to say is loaded equals loaded, so now the loaded flag will show up. And we're going to switch on the buffer's dirty state. And just like up here, that is going to look like this, right? Except we're not doing lit strings this time. Okay, so we get those and we submit them onto the lister, and then at the end we want to return our lister. So there we go. That gives me a list of all of the files in the current hot directory. Okay. So now what we want to do is I think that that's all we're going to need, because anytime we now want to do like an interactive, like, oh, I update the list, I just have to make sure that that's happening in a response to an event that has a way to communicate that its response needs to be to keep on doing listing but with a new list, right? So I should be able to do a sort of switching out the list. So the things I don't have yet are when I'm setting up the lister API here, or when I'm setting up my list here, I don't specify the search string or the text field that I want rendered. So I'm going to have to figure out how that happens still. But this is progress. So that's what the main heart of the API needs to look like, I think. And then what we want to do is, before I actually go and implement that, I want to figure out how to wire that up with everything else. I don't want to implement that only to later discover that this doesn't wire up with any of the other API correctly. So what we'll do is we'll go to the UI helper, and we will shit. The big foe asks, is clear type font something going, down the line here? Maybe. I don't know. It won't be right away. I don't know if it'll be before or after the new engine. I'm trying not to let the current engine get too much feature creep. I want to keep the remaining set of to-do items on the current engine small, because the more things I do on the current engine, the harder it gets to do the engine upgrade, and the longer it takes to get there. And the engine upgrade is going to be very valuable. It's going to fix the problems with being somewhat too C++ centric and not being able to control the indentation of the virtual white space at all, and not being able to do a very good job of controlling the keywords or parsing effects. All that stuff will get fixed in the new engine, and that's worth a lot to a lot of people. So the question is, do I want to wait until after then, or should I fit it in before then to do the clear type style font rendering? I'm not totally sure. I'm kind of leaning towards waiting. Um, it's a big deal to some people, and um, the good news is I've gotten practice implementing it because I'm implementing it at RAD, or I'm still getting practice implementing it at RAD right now. So by the time I'm done with that, I'll probably end up having the knowledge to just sit down and whip one out. Insabot says tonic water for tea. I'm not sure what he's talking about. Insabot, you're not on your game today. Say something on point. Yeah, I think the only reason I could be persuaded to do the font stuff now is the time is coming sooner rather than later that I need to upgrade the rendering layer again, because Mac support really needs me to get off OpenGL, which means I need to segment off the renderer anyway, and right now the font considers itself a part. The text rasterizing shit considers itself a part of the rendering shit, which I want to change next time I visit rendering anyway. I want to sort of modular. I know how to construct a project better than I did when I made 4coder now. And I want to kind of get in there and reconfigure the hookups. But if I do that, I might as well get a big font upgrade in at the same time. So there's a chance that I'll want to do that soon anyway as a sort of a free extra week's worth of work in part of a necessary sort of necessary changes that'll have to happen anyway. Whoops. So I'm not saying that it definitely won't happen or definitely will. I'm saying I prefer not to, but there's some possibility that it will anyway. Hard to say. Alright, so if I go to include, I've just increased the number of files once again. .j. Come on. The first compile is taking so long that I can't compile again. There we go. What's the holdup now? You still don't know what a lister is, huh? So I created a UI helper, and I made a lister. What's happening? There it is. Jim had it moments before I did. Way to go, Jim. If you were behind the keyboard, we could have saved a second there. Okay. So, now I'm just going to stub out the rest of this nonsense, and we can get on with our lives doing the other stuff. Because I'm not ready to implement this yet. Lister begin, partition, arena. Gotta rename the struct someday. Static, boom, lister, boom, return, lister, boom. Next. Too many initializers, blah 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 blah, I'm a dork. Here. Lister, add item. lister, string, buffer name, string, or string name, string status, void star, user data. We're going to want to go back to here and create a pre-alloced, lister pre-alloced string, which is just a string. It's literally just a string, except that it will let us use the type system for a little bit of trickery. Lister pre-alloced string result, same size please, dot string equals string, return a result. And so now I can grab that, and this goes lister pre-alloced string, etc., etc. And you're thinking, what, you're going to implement it 4 times? No, fool. I ain't going to do none of that. All we got to do is manually pre-allocate this nonsense. So we just go name lister pre-allocate push string copy lister arena status, right? Do it like that. Boom. Flip them. Boom. Alright. So there we go. And then this one we will implement later. Yeah. Alright, so that's the API. Blah 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 blah. No overload function takes 3 arguments. What are you talking about? I didn't pass it 3 arguments. You don't recognize push string copy. That's the problem. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to go like that? Boom. Perfect. Boom. Get buffer by file name. Oh, missing comma. Okay. Ba-boom. Ba-boom, ba-boom. There we go. So, yeah. Cool. Alright. So we have that API stubbed out. There's really only 2 things that are interesting that we have to implement, which are these 2 things. And of course then we'll also have to use the data that we generate later from that, which is sort of a part of the API we haven't looked at yet. But maybe that's the part of the API we want to look at next. So how is this going to work when we try to use one of these to create this, right? So I don't want to call view update UI for switch buffer list anymore. Rather, I want to be able to call some kind of generic thing that does this and pass it the lister data, right? So where do I call that right now? I think what I should do is cancel this out and take a look. So yeah, lots of these commands trigger events that want to update the list. And these include for reasons like we've changed what our search string looks like. So changing the search string, changing the activated item index, changing the search string again, and moving around. So all of these basically are opportunities when we might want to update the list itself and always want to update the UI. Right? So in the generic version, for instance, when we backspace or insert a character, we need to be able to tell it how we change our text field, how we change our query field, and possibly regenerate the list. Right, I know I've barely been live for any time at all, but I just had lunch and I forgot something that happens to me every time I have lunch, which is why I always end up taking a 5-minute break on my second stream of the day. It's because I've just had lunch, and after having lunch I always have about 5 to 10 minutes before I have to use a bathroom break. So I will be right back. Alright, let's get back to it. What was I working on? Right. I was working on how we're going to do a replacement for the 4 switch buffer list that is based on the new lister data. I have to think about how I think this will actually work. I need I don't even have in my head right now a picture of the data flow, which is bothering me. So let me pull up Milton here and try to draw this. Alright, I should probably get the latest version of Milton at some point. This is such an old version. They've almost certainly gotten frustrated with me if they've ever seen... What was it? Sergio's almost certainly gotten frustrated with me if he's ever seen me using this version. Okay. So, the problem that I face today can basically be described like this. I have several different types of lists that I want to implement. Right, we got our buffer list and our file system list. And each of these can then be attached with several actions that are like, you know, switch and kill, can be attached there, open, new, and save as can be attached here. Right? And so this part of it here is not that interesting. This is the easy part. Attaching an action that I do when completed. But these two lists behave quite differently, and I kind of don't want to end up with lots of different like I don't want to end up with this much separation where I have the buffer lister right here and the file system lister. I want one generalized lister abstraction that I can build both of these with, right? And that users could build new lists with too. Now what properties does this need to be able to have? Well, this thing here has a bunch of commands attached to it. It has a command map. So I will draw my command map. You know, I don't know how a command map looks. Maybe it looks like this in my head. It's like a sort of squiggly thing with little things in it that point out to commands. Right? And so these are some code that can be executed, which code is sort of like a line of scribble, right? I mean, everyone knows that. That's not controversial. And here's the lister. The generic lister system sets this as the command map. Keys come in from here and go to here. This code here triggers events. And, sorry, I'm crunching again. Here's a tic-tac this time. So when we invoke the buffer list initially, we create a lister. This is like the lister runner, right? And then what I'm trying to do is make it so that, well, let's see, there's various different events that can happen. Default things that need to happen when those events come in sometimes, but also maybe just per list handlers. I mean, basically what's confusing here is that the buffer list and the file list treat input quite differently in certain cases. So can they actually be merged? To what extent can the two be merged? I guess what we want is for everything that is likely to be overridden, basically input character backspace, up down. For those things we want to be able to have the user set a set of callbacks. Right, so I think what we end up needing is to make this work. The thing we pass to the lister runner is a set of callbacks. This comes in here. Those callbacks can just most of the time pull from some defaults that explain how to do this, and one callback that explains how to generate a list data structure. Then this thing calls this whenever it needs to. These things can also call this. This gets so complicated and nasty. So here's a question. Do we actually need this in the call? Because the invoking of the buffer could call this directly, and these could call this directly. So when do we actually ever need that? Well, the only reason we might care about controlling that from here is memory management. But I'm not sure. Looks like surround sound speaker. Oh, my my map. Yeah, my key map does look like a big speaker thing. Huh. So here's basically the rub. What's complicated is, one, the memory management for the list, because I want to make sure that whatever data is on there is independent from the Scratch arena, right? The global Scratch arena can't contain that, because that ruins the whole idea that different lists can be in different views operating independently at the same time. And so we need to have a memory management story for that. And then secondly, okay, I see how we can manage the memory for that now. So the state for the lister holds a pointer that is the lister data, and then that lister data gets updated by us when we need to update it. And then the events can still be overridden by callback. That's not very troublesome, because most of the time you will just use the default callbacks, and it'll only be the people who are trying to do something different that need the more interesting callbacks. And it's not even a matter of directly callbacks, is it? It's more like modifying just putting in different commands entirely. And that means the base command is just calling another command that's been plopped in there as the navigate up, navigate down, and then there's the activation function. Okay. Okay, I think that's a nearly complete picture in my head. So for this one, I'm going to start from the data description, because that's the thing I've just worked out. So I don't want to call that lister anymore. I want to call that Hold on a sec. I'm experiencing some unusual lag. Okay, OBS is particularly high right now. I'm going to leave that right there so that I can keep seeing it. Shit. Stop it. Okay, that's not it. I'm not sure where all this lag is coming from right now. I mean, I guess it's OBS at like 30%, but I feel like that doesn't fully explain it, because it's always like that. And the system idle is super low, which means it's going somewhere else. I just don't know where exactly. It doesn't show me that much more. Milton. That's the culprit. That's probably the other thing I gotta get out of the way. Yeah. Too many simultaneously hardware accelerated applications running or something like this. Okay. So yeah, probably having two things that are both complicating the OBS capture was making it pretty bad. Yeah, it's down to 20 now. Alright, so let me go back to describing that data structure now. Alright, so we have a couple of these custom command functions. Where do I type def that? Perfect. So a custom command function for the following things. We need one for backspace, one for insert character, one for navigate up, one for navigate down, alright, so those are the ones we need. And then we also need the activation, which will go like this. We need type def lister activation function, takes an application links, a view summary, and a UI item. Alright. And that probably wants to return activation, like a lister activation code. which we can drop right here. There we go. Ooh. Okay. All right. So the next thing is this state here. Yeah, so what we want to do is we want to have two of these in here to look like, actually we actually need three. Probably do it like this. Query, text field, and key string. Alright, so there's a start, and then we can take that out. Take that out. And put in So here's a question. How do I get that memory there to work correctly? I think I have to pre-allocate and just hope that it works. Yeah. Yeah. Because I can't put this actual global Scratch arena here. I don't have per view arenas yet. Maybe I should just add that at this point. It's come up so many goddamn times. And alternatively, I could just put that on the heap and then free it when we're done with it. Or leave it there and reuse it over and over again. I'm considering why these two are separated. Why aren't these the same thing? So, do they get updated on different schedules? Well, this, in theory, would just be the same forever, but they wouldn't really need to be the same forever for any reason. There's no reason you couldn't just change that and keep this the except that the only time you get a chance to change that is also when you have a chance to change this with it, but maybe you don't want to change them together. And technically you wouldn't have to even if they were merged. You could just write over these and not change these. On the other hand, of course, keeping them separate has the main advantage that I can have some of these when I don't have these and vice versa, but I think there's always one-to-one here. I'm always going to have one of these and one of these right next to each other all the time in the state anyway. Why aren't they just together? Right? I mean, this could just become a part of a lister. The lister has its event handlers and then its description of its list. Okay. So this can go back to just being called a lister. And this here is a the list description. List data. Okay, yeah, I'm happy with that. So that thing there describes my lister. Describes how it reacts to input or events and what it looks like. What contents it contains, and then the actual loop, the actual thing that generates the UI from that lister will just be using this data to basically do one of these in a nice simple way, and it pulls it from there. Okay, I think that makes sense. These need to go back to being called a lister. Sorry, this stream is kind of, me working through a hard thing, so it might seem like I'm kind of slowly waffling back and forth and not really committing to an idea, but I am. It's just a very subtle and gradual set of changes that need to be made. It feels kind of like I'm dealing in a very abstract space right now, so it's hard to describe what's going through my head. So the hot buffer ID is gone. We need something to replace that for keeping track of what's been clicked. I think what we want is hot raw index or something like that. Not sure. If each of them have, okay, I know what I can do. Hot user data, right? If they don't all have unique user data anyway, then that's just a bug on the user's part. And so if they end up with two things with the same user data, then it's not understood that they could be returned any of those items when one of them gets activated, because they all have the same user data, and therefore whichever one you pick, yeah, and in fact, I mean, this is how this one actually wanted to work in the first place, so why don't we just do that? That way, it's very clear that you can't expect to get the correct item from the click, because we use the user data and the user data only to even determine what's being clicked, to uniquely determine what's being clicked. So two different things with the same user data are, for all intents and purposes, different regions on the same button. And hopefully the user won't ever actually try to leverage that, but if they do, it will actually work that way. And so if that's what they wanted, then great. but it's a bit of an odd design choice on their part at that point. So instead of hot buffer ID, we have hot user data equals 0. We've also said that a user data of 0 has a special meaning anyway, because it usually doesn't encode something useful. Hopefully that works. Although, why would we need to bother with having it be, why wouldn't it just be an index? Like item index is. And we know the hover index, when they click down, oh, except that we have to figure it out by tricky. When they click down, we have to first figure out the layout, and then we can determine what it is they hit. From there, because we don't have a place where we actually keep the original list data around. We might want to stuff that into the state if we're going to be doing this thing where we're stuffing stuff into the state that's on the general memory of the custom layer anyway. Right, so the next thing I want to think about are these text fields, because I don't necessarily want to have to wrap them all in strings. So I think what we'll just do is say that, well, that's just gone anyway, but when we init a list state, we now want to be able to say, here's your lister. I think we want to be able to do that. Maybe not. Maybe we just let it init that to 0. And then I'm not in love with this. Basically what's bugging me there is that we have a mixture between this is a descriptor, it describes a thing, it's not a builder. A structure that contains all the context necessary to construct some data is a builder, and this has kind of evolved to be the thing that is specifically for describing the data. I don't like to mix in the context that got us to that data with the data we were trying to get to, because now the people who are trying to just store that data after the fact also are storing a bunch of nonsense pointers to context information that they didn't ever want, and now it's just sitting around being a problem and tempting you to do shit with it that you shouldn't be doing. So now the lister just describes, and it does not contain context, which means all of these should probably take their arena as just a member, or as a parameter actually. this is where I start scratching my head and deciding what the best thing to do is about these strings, because if I don't store the size of them in here, I end up having to do the size query of them all the time. If I do store the size in there, then I just want to end up storing the strings. You know, we're going to go with it. But if we do it that way, then we can't begin a lister this way. We have to begin it this way. So there's query, there's text field, and there's key string. And there we go. Of course, these can't return either. This is the annoying thing about doing this where I use a string that points to a fixed width portion right here, is that now I can't return this ever, because then those strings point to the local copy on the stack that doesn't exist anymore. Which is just this big pain in the constant ass. Or this constant pain in the big ass. Or this constant big pain in the ass. That's what I was looking for. Forget all the things I said before that. And the solution would be if I could do something fancy like this. Right, if I went ahead and embraced templates, then I could say, make me a fixed width string like this, and then I could have that decay into a normal string pretty easily. Because then a copy of one lister to another would do the full 256 byte copies of these. Of course, I don't know if you actually even want to be copying those, so maybe it's for the best. There we go. So, now what we can do is, when it comes time to activate this activation is all wrong anyway. So we need to write a new activation that generalizes. Okay, so here we're hitting on more interesting stuff. So this is fine. That's fine. And then what this one here has to do is pretty simply just grab the state from the current view, and then if that state's lister has a backspace handler, we're going to call that backspace handler. Boom. That's it. Done. Similarly, this is going to right here become a default, right? And then the actual move up is just dispatching on navigate up. Navigate down. Whoops, don't know how to spell. Look, I'm not diagnosed, but there's all kinds of evidence that I'm dyslexic, and that's just a perfect example of it right there. I'm at least like below average when it comes to the handling of spelling and word recognition. So keep this in mind, Jim. And you won't be so surprised when you see me make those kinds of mistakes. Alright, and then so Jim asks, have you given thought to the possibility of refreshing a list? Example, making a search query and having the possibility of pressing a button to update it. Yes, I have been thinking about stuff like that. So the thing that I'm most thinking about is how exactly I'm going to handle the case where right now if I have the switch list up and then I load project, for instance, that I will automatically, as soon as the load project is done, see the update in the list, because it was every time it rendered the list doing the full thing of reiterating all of the buffers to create the list and then generating a UI from there. The current system doesn't actually have anything set up to make that possible, for the user to control when that regeneration of the list happens. There's basically two phases. There's fill the list of strings and then fill the UI from that list of strings, and it used to be that those two phases always happened together because they were coupled in the code. I'm now decoupling them so that users can write their list of strings without also having to write the UI part of it, which is a lot more work, so that they can just submit a list of strings and off they go. But if they get into a situation where they want to be able to control when that list of strings gets refreshed, I'm not totally sure how I want to handle that yet. It automatically can be refreshed anytime any of these events happen. And I might also want to just say that the repaint command down here has a handler as well, right? It could just be that I say that this is the default handler for repaint, but you can make your own repaint so that your refresh can be whatever you want, and then in your command map you can just bind repaint to something else, and then set your repaint handler to not only update the UI, but update your list whenever you want your refresh stuff to update the list all the time. Alternatively to that, you could always just write your own command and add it to the list mode, but I probably should support it, right? I probably should support it. Because anything I don't support directly is going to be a big pain in the ass for the user to end up, you know, that's a good point. There, that solves some of it, but still not all of it, and I think that the refresh is important enough that I should do it. I just haven't fully wrapped my head around how I want it to work. Yeah, what this will do is now the user doesn't. The thing I was worried about was if you make your own list, you would have to make your own lister state to go along with the existing state and edit the code. This will just let users stuff in whatever extra handlers they want for new commands, and then they can add them to the command map. But I should probably handle it better than that. I should at least, I mean, this will just let you customize more freely, but I still need to handle the refresh, I think, because that's serious enough. Edvin Holm, what do you use for profiling? I don't really use anything for profiling. I just do my profiling manually, like put in RDTSCs or something, or query performance counters, and, you know, look at what times I'm getting. I usually don't profile the whole program, which is a bad habit, but it's because I've like written 3 or 4 different profiler viewers, like profile collectors and viewers over the course of 4coder, and I can never really keep them working past the day I write them. Like, they work for a few days, and then they drift off to the point where they're useless, and I just scrap them. And so at this point, I've somewhat given up on having a built-in, always running profiler, which is a really bad place to actually be, because you want to do a better job giving yourself visual information about your program than I am doing, I guess I would say. It's a thing I should work on. I should practice being better about that. Okay, we'll get back to the matter of refresh in a bit. In the meantime, we have a default handler for these 4 now. Doop, 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 doop. And then we have the dispatchers that will be used. So the next problem is this activation here. And the real issue is, let's see, hot buffer ID is just gonna, yeah, so we were already using user data in that way, so that's perfect. Hot user data. Yeah, we store the hot user data, and then if the clicked user data matches the hot user data, then we're going to say if, let's see, we want to get the lister activation code set up. The default behavior will be to finish, and then if the state lister has a activate function. Then we will call that and set the code from there. App view clicked user data. Perfect, perfect. Couldn't be happier. And then activate switch buffer. Lister activation code, return lister activation finished. And what we will then do is, if all of this is done correctly and the code equals lister activation finished, then we end the UI mode. Otherwise, we do not. Okay, that's getting us some kind of somewhere. Right, so the default right character is going to insert a character on the lister's text field and on the lister's key string. And we'll rewrite that soon. We're getting close. Oh, fucking chill, will ya? Sorry, I was just thinking about that refresh stuff some more. I think I have a bad habit of like drifting off while I'm on stream and not keeping the flow going. Because I feel like that happens a lot, that I'll just be sitting here going, about something without telling you guys what's going through my head at all. Feels like something that happens a lot. Shit. Thought I copied that. Yeah. Shit. God damn it. Keep hitting F1 and F2 at the same time. why I don't just turn that off at this point. Jim asked what the void scratch is about. Look, it disables this warning right here, which I have this warning set to turn into an error for reasons I don't understand. It's supposed to help me do very, very basic catching of mistakes, and once in a while it actually helps because you write a variable into your scope and then you forget to actually use it, and the fact that you wrote it but never made a variable that you never used is like a reminder that you haven't finished what you started, and so you catch a bug that way. But other times, it's like I'm gonna use that, I just haven't, I'm like temporarily transitioning through a phase where I'm not using it, but I don't want to delete all of those scratches because I'm gonna add them back in just a minute. And so it's just this warning that I have an initialized but unused local variable, and that warning gets lofted into an error. So since I don't want to delete that, and I don't want to add something that actually uses a void scratch, tells it to act like I'm using it even though I'm not. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so now doopy doopy doo. The thing I want to do next is get this rewrite to work. And maybe thinking about how I'm going to do this activate along the way, because this activate here, the way it works is it iterates the buffers and finds the one that it basically does the work that the layout would have done to find out what item to activate. Which I need to figure out how I'm actually going to figure out the correct item myself now. I don't think that'll be too hard, because I can just stuff that information right here. You'll see how that works in a minute, so let me go and fix that part first. So now what I can do is, if I go to here, I look at, I've got an initialized state. I want to figure out what the user data is, and the way I can do that is I can go to my states lister, and somehow I don't actually have the data structures in here that answer this question, but somehow I want to be able to go lister get user data. Here's the lister, here's the raw index that I get out of the state, and then activate. Right, so this code here, I'm going to replace this with something called call active lister call activate handler. Let's see what we do in here. So we want to figure out how to get this at some point. But we don't necessarily need to jump straight into answering that question right now. There we go. Stubbed out another one. Not sure why I'm tired. Maybe I should go brew up a tea. That seems like a really good idea, actually. I'm an hour and 20 minutes into this stream. I have it building. I'm going to pull this out, and we're going to say that my next big mission, the big thing to do next, is replace this heart of the engine, of the Lister engine, of the Lister system, whatever you want to call this, the Lister wrapper that I'm building now. I need to replace this with something that is driven with the new Lister data structure. And then most of this will be working. I still have to go back and reconsider all the memory management implications for how the Lister gets actually stored and freed, since that can't happen on the Scratch partition. The easy thing to do would just be to allocate it into the heap, and then stick a pointer to that memory in the state, build an arena on top of that memory, and then reuse that memory every time. This would mean that it never... I would probably want something smarter than just an arena, because I can't relocate this data. It's got interconnected pointers to itself, and at the same time I can't if I try to make it allocate new chunks, then I have to be able to free all those new chunks when the time comes, which means I probably want a growing arena. I don't know. We'll think about that part later. So our first big mission is this core thing, and then the memory management will come last. And I will do that when I come back from shutting down the stream to start up a pot of tea. Well, to start boiling a pot of water to make tea. Alright, I'll be back in just a bit. Bye-bye.